The name of this morning's panel is Can More Than One Person Train and Race a Dog Team? Our panel members this morning are probably known to most of you, if not all of you. On the far left, Deedee Jonrowe, Vern Halter, Roxy Wright Champagne, and Charlie Champagne. You're looking at some of the top dog drivers anywhere in the world, not simply in Alaska. Deedee is a professional racer and kennel owner. She's run in the Iditarod 14 times. She's been in the top 10 for the last 9 years. She's entered the Alparod, the European stage race, 4 times, and been in the top 2 or the top 3 all 4 times. One of the reasons we asked Deedee for this panel today is since 1992, all of her competitive teams have been trained by both Deedee and her husband Mike. And in fact, the first time this happened, Deedee had her best ever Iditarod finish, and it caused her to seriously rethink some of her ideas about who had to do all the training. Vern Halter ran his first Iditarod in 1983. He ran the Quest for the first time in 1988 and won that race in 1990. Vern shares his kennel with his wife, Susan Whiteman, who is also a veterinarian, and brings that skill to their partnership. Vern is a professional musher, trained as an attorney and abandoned that and decided mushing was more fun. Roxy and Charlie, I think in this community, need no introduction. Roxy's been running dogs, as near as I can tell, since the day she was born, if not in the basket, on the runners, or being pulled behind. I just told Charlie I know he's been running dogs for more than 20 years because I met him 20 years ago and he was already mushing. And in fact, Charlie said he had his first dogs in 1970. Both Charlie and Roxy have won the Open North American race here in Fairbanks, for Rendezvous and Anchorage, which are clearly the 2 most prestigious sprint races in the world. I think sometimes it's real easy when you sit out there in the panel and say, well, okay, you guys are all hotshot mushers, but you know, I just run dogs in Gulfstream Valley. I don't want to win the North American. And do you guys really remember what it's like to be where I was, or do you have anything to tell me? And I guess I'd encourage all of you to remember and keep in mind, believe it or not, every one of us up on this stage once had our first dog, and we did all the dumb, crazy, fun things that you could possibly do and made every mistake in the book over and over and over. Charlie just told me about looking at a postcard trying to figure out how to put a harness on a dog. My first dog team was delivered on the Sunday of North American. 6 dogs, 6 dog houses, a sled, and a tow line came in the back of a pickup truck, and the guy that delivered them didn't want to miss the start of the North American, and he left. I didn't even know the names of the dogs. He said something about, don't do something with that black dog. I didn't remember what the something I wasn't supposed to do was, and what it was is I wasn't supposed to hook him up first, and I wasn't supposed to put him in wheel. So I hooked him up first and put him in wheel, and the first thing he did is chewed my tow line, and my whole dog team ran away, and I didn't even know their names. One of the questions that my husband Lloyd and I have always trained and raced our dog team together. We got started that way, and you know, we hooked up those first 6 dogs together, and basically the reason we got more is we got sick and tired of riding around on the same sled together with 400 or 500 pounds being pulled with the same 6 dogs, and so we figured we had to have more dogs so that we could each have our own dog team. Some people start as singles and run dogs by themselves for a while and then later acquire a partner or get a bigger kennel and decide they need a handler. I think for all of us, people come up to us and they say, well, you know, how do you train dogs with someone? It sounds like a great idea, but I mean, how do you really do this? Or, well, I just got a handler, but I don't quite know how to use them. And we've had enough interest that we thought this year we'd try to ask some of those questions. I started this morning with just some ideas I had in terms of questions panelists had given me, and as through all of these discussions over the weekend, there's index cards in the package you got down front, and write your questions down and bring them to the front, and we'll try to field them as best we can. There should be some index cards up at the back door also as you came in if your packet's empty. I guess maybe the first thing I'll start with is to ask maybe Roxy, have you always trained your dogs with a partner, or did you once train more by yourself and end up switching from sort of one mode to the other, where at one point you did it mostly by yourself and ultimately mostly as a couple?
Well, I guess to me, dog munching is a family endeavor, and I remember riding in the sled with my mom and my dad and my first dog team ride all by myself, and I was very proud. And then when I was older and had children, I took my children with me, and when Charlie and I got together, we were doing it together. But for a lot of years, when I couldn't afford to have a team by myself, I was helping my dad, and he in turn helped me and taught me a lot of things, and probably a lot of things I didn't even realize I was learning from my dad, because he's one of the greatest dog mushers ever, too. And I think it's a big bonus to be able to share the dogs in knowledge with others, and especially one's family. So I don't think I've ever done it all on my own. It's always been with family support.
It's hard for me to imagine not sharing it with someone else. I think as much as anything, it's not just the physical help, but it's the sharing part of it. Deedee, you didn't always have Mike quite as involved in your training. Why did you change directions, and why did you stay that direction once you changed?
Well, I changed out of necessity because I broke my hand and my knee, and I couldn't do it by myself. So the Thanksgiving that I slapped the tree and had to have a plate in my hand was when Mike had to take over and train that team. And, that was really the beginning. I mean, it was just a medical emergency. It wasn't because he had some, sudden longing in his heart to be on the back of a dog sled.
You've got to produce.
Yeah. I'm like, well, okay, and, but, obviously it worked out really good, and there became obvious to me that, there was some real advantages to it, and I think, from that, one of the things is we don't have handlers ever running our team dogs. Our handlers only run young or very old dogs, but never run the main racing team. And it came from that experience and saying, well, if we screw up, this is a family screw up, and it'll be the family finances, and we're not gonna ride each other. If Michael brings in a dog and it's sore, and I said, didn't you see that dog was sore? I know that he did the very best he could. He wants the dogs to be successful too. So it was that, we had the same investment, both financially and emotionally. And so from that kind of a commitment, I knew that he would do the very best he possibly could. And he's really a perfectionist, and I'm kind of not as much of a perfectionist. So, he brought that kind of steadiness, to it, where I'm kind of by the seat of the pants. Well, I think this is happening here, I think that's happening here. And Mike would go back and he'd write down everything, and he'd say, did you realize you thought X dog was doing good for the last 2 weeks? Or did you realize you've been thinking X dog's been, not looking right for 2 weeks, for instance? And he brought that kind of consistency to the evaluation of the program. And that's why we stayed with it, and it was successful. And I remember being in Unilocleat the year that we were racing, for second place in '93. And of course, at that point, I thought it was probably racing for third. And one of the native guys asked me, one of my friends said, is there anything I can do for you? And we had already decided that our handler was going to come to Nome, and Michael was going to stay home and take care of the kennel as a present for what a good job the handler had done for us that year. Because he'd had to work extra hard since I couldn't even carry a bucket or anything. And, I said, just call Mike and find somebody to take care of that kennel. So I want him to see how good he did. And I was still driving 16 dogs at that time, and I just was so blown away at what a good job he had done that I wanted him to get the benefit of seeing those guys come up Front Street. Just share that moment of success after that winter of frustration.
Vern, what do you think there are real benefits to having two people instead of one drive and train the dog team? And if so, what do you think the biggest benefits are?
Well, I actually think the benefits far outweigh the negative aspects, if there are any. I got to agree with Roxy that it's Susan and I are partners, and it's really fun to work in a business with your partner. And I think, when the way our kennel developed is a lot of times in the early years, I raced the Iditarod, then I raced the Quest. I was pretty much by myself, mainly because Susan went to vet school and she was gone. and I worked at it and was pretty isolated in that aspect. But I think the true advantage is a partnership. She knows the dogs as well as I do. I know them as well as she does. Right now, we're kind of gearing. She's going to go to Wyoming. We do have dogs separated by Iditarod dogs, Wyoming dogs, and her whole focus is to train and take care of those dogs to go to Wyoming, where I'm totally working on the Iditarod type dogs. So we do have it kind of distinguished that way, and we also do a lot of grouping by age. And we're kind of blessed with a great handler, trainer right now, Beth Manning. She works with all those younger dogs, mainly because there's only so much you can do. There's only so much time in a day, and that's kind of how. If I could work with young dogs, I'd love it, but you just don't have that much time. So, the more time you spend together with your partner, your wife, or in the training, I think the better off you are.
Charlie, I'm going to ask you this one. Anytime two people work together, they have different opinions about how things are done, and sometimes they agree, sometimes they disagree. How do you and Roxy ensure consistency in your approach? How much consistency do you think there needs to be? And how much time did you guys spend talking about what you were doing to make sure you were on the same wavelength?
Well, for us, it's been sort of a matter of a goal distinction. We want to produce a winning team with our kennel in any given season. And obviously, we don't have enough finances or dogs to do that with two teams. We focus all of our efforts in making our kennel as productive as possible. And we don't have any inner competition amongst ourselves within our family. The goal is to make the team win, and we're all part of the team. And if Roxy's racing the team that year, then I'll drive. Usually we have enough dogs to have two teams earlier in the season, 16 dog teams or something along that number. And if she's going to race the main team in a given season, then the other team must complement the main team. And to do that, we communicate a lot. That seems to be the key to the whole thing. At the end of the day, when the chores are all done, it's nice to sort of have the debriefing of the dogs while it's fresh in your mind before you get off on phone calls and other little projects and whatnot. But all during any given season, the effort is just to produce the winning team. We do it in a lot of different ways, too, with the support systems, the way we work them. We do a lot of things that allow us to both understand every given dog. Ultimately, when you race, when the guy says go, you're the captain at that stage of the game. You're the one that has to make the final decision as to who stays in the truck and who goes in the team and that sort of stuff. So we just try to talk about it a lot. And sometimes we plan every given season that I'm going to race this year, or I should say this is back when we did race. I'm going to race a given season, or she's going to race a given season. That worked out quite well. We do a lot of things like that when we're, for example, down at the Fur Rendezvous in Anchorage. That was always sort of our biggest goal to achieve. Given consecutive heats, the Saturday and the Sunday of the race, we get up first thing in the morning, take all the dogs to a big lit parking lot, and one of us will take the dogs out of the truck. And this is something we don't get the handlers to help with at all. They can stay in bed as far as that goes. And then one person will let all the dogs loose at the same time, so that first step they take when they get out of the truck in the morning, which I guess theoretically will be their worst step of the day. You've been digging holes with the shovel for 10 hours, and you get out of bed in the morning, you're a little stiff that first step. And the other person, you've got to have the coffee cup, that's important. You stand back from the truck 20 or 30 feet and watch the dogs make that first movement of the day. And you don't get confused that way, and then we can discuss it all. And it seems to work well for us as a family to communicate well on that level and share the excitement of the dogs. It seems like it'd be really hard to be part of a partnership in dogs, or a family, or a spouse, or whatever your relationship is, if you didn't have the capacity to share that excitement. I mean, you're a dog owner and a racer. It consumes a lot of your daily thought process. It's exciting. It's a big part of your life. And to be able to share that with another person is nice in the family, and it's good for the dogs. We train them together, and we run both of the teams together so that they get past training. And the way that we do train them also is to make sure that all of our best dogs, in other words, the ones that we think have the greatest potential to win in a given season, are in one team, and the other team, in terms of the dog structure in that team, is basically the ones that are going to support the main team. So we keep one team that generally runs a lot better than the other team.
Okay, realizing that an awful lot of people listening to us this morning don't race, and that that's not their primary goal, but they are running dogs with their spouses or their handlers or their buddies next door. Vern, how do you and Susan resolve conflict when you disagree? I mean, Lloyd and I are two strong-willed people. We're pretty opinionated, and sometimes we agree, and a lot of times we don't agree at all. And when you come home at the end of the day and one of you says, this dog's not fast enough, and the other one says, of course it is, or if I come home and say, Lloyd, I want to change the diet, and he says, I don't want to change the diet. How do you talk about that? How do you work through it? Do you have a boss and a employee, or do you work through it together? And
Well, it's the way, kind of a preface to that, the way I've divided up the kennel, or we've divided up the kennel last 2 years, Susan was driving the junior varsity team in the Iditarod, which was basically a training type run, all the younger dogs, 18 months up to 3 years, and maybe 1 or 2 older leaders to support them and get them up there. And the whole goal was a training type aspect, and I was taking the more sophisticated dogs, and that was the goal the last couple of years. Now, of course, she's going to have we hope, a competitive team going to Wyoming. As far as the decisions, like on the Iditarod, the way we have divided this year, Iditarod and Wyoming, right now we have basically an equal type of feeding program, but I think we're going to try to leave the decisions up for each separate team to that individual musher, and that's going to be your responsibility to pick your dog, select them, to make the decisions on training, different types of training you're going to do, and you develop your team. The other person's going to be there for support as much as possible, considering that each is taking on a fairly major race, and we're going to leave it up to that. Usually when it comes down to crunch, it's usually 2 votes to 1. At our kennel, there's Beth and Susan, it's 2 to 1, so I always lose. And that's so I don't vote very often.
I mean, some of you may be sitting there, I'm not really asking anybody on this panel how they resolve their personal differences at home, but the sort of underlying part of this question is, if Roxy and Charlie are fighting over how they're going to train Pluto and Cordova, I'm not, or you're not, worried about Roxy and Charlie. The dogs perceive all of that, and if the people driving the dogs don't have a clear idea about the message coming to them, they have a much harder time doing what they're asked to do. And so underlying all of this is we all work out our partnerships, and as you work out a partnership with a handler or a friend or a significant other, you have to make absolutely sure that the dog doesn't get mixed messages, and that whatever disagreements you have, or trying new things, that you're giving something consistent to that dog out in front of you who doesn't have the benefit of the hours and hours in the house. He just knows what happens when you get on the back of the runners. How much consistency, Deedee, do you expect between do you expect you and Mike to do absolutely everything the same, or how much do you figure the dogs? Lloyd and my styles are different, and I, for example, like my dogs to be relatively quiet and not jump around a whole lot when they stop, because it bothers me. And it doesn't bother Lloyd at all, and he's happy to have them do that. And as near as the dogs just figure that out, and we don't worry about requiring exactly the same thing when we stop. However, when we say get up, we require the same thing. How much consistency are you looking for?
I think in our case it's probably a little bit different, because Mike is not racing, and this is not his passion. On his fishing boat, he calls the shots and I do what he says. And in my dog team, ultimately I'm the one racing them, so I'm pretty well calling the shots, and he's carrying it through. And that's the way it is with both the handlers with the young dogs and the main race team. I'm the one who comes with the commands, and I'm the one who says what's the level of tolerance in certain behavior matters, and ultimately I'm the one who has to live with it on the trail. So there's a lot of request for consistency. Now, that's obviously with an individual person's, even the sound of their voice is different, so those things change some, but I have to live with that. I have to race with it, so I'm the one that, in this case, calls the shots. And like I said, we have a mutual respect inside the family, that in his business and on his boat, I do what he says, and vice versa. But we don't handle the dog team 2 different ways, other than he's heavier and he can stop them more consistently than I can. But other than that, you know.
Roxy, you want to take a stab at that one?
I think that it's real important to have two people training the dog team that they have similar styles. And Charlie and I have been successful at it in that we both race too, but we have very similar styles in how we treat our dogs, how we want our dogs to behave, what we want our dogs to do. And if we had very different styles, I don't think we could have been successful at both training the dogs, because dogs excel when they have consistency. That is what makes a good dog. I mean, whether this dog is slow or fast, for it to do right, you have to teach it what you want it to do. And if you are not consistent, it will be very, it won't have any confidence. It'll try to do things wrong because it doesn't know what is expected of it. But with Charlie and I, when we train and race our dogs, we both love our dogs. The dogs are very friendly towards us, but we do expect the dogs to know that it's a job and that it's not just something we're doing for fun on a Sunday drive. The dogs know that this is a job, but they love to do their job. And both Charlie and I train very similarly. There's little differences. His voice is different. And he chirps the dogs to pick them up. I can't chirp, I whistle. But, I mean, the dogs, they know us both and interact with us so that it's not, the dogs know that, okay, this is just Charlie, he chirps, Roxy whistles.
Now, you guys have been doing this together long enough that now, you're probably like all of us on this panel, you take it for granted. When you guys first started racing together, how did you work on that consistency, or how did you know it was there? I mean, thinking about people who are trying to figure out, I mean, how do we get the rules straight? Did you sit down and have real just discussions saying this is how we're going to do it, or this is how I do it, this is how, I mean, how do you plan that kind of consistency? Anybody?
You know, Kathy, before I answer that, I want to expand on what Roxy said for a second, because, you know, this consistency that she's talking about, and I agree 150%, and that's what I was saying on mine, is also true with the success of a dog that you buy from another kennel. I have been extremely successful with dogs that I have bought straight out of their young teams with Roxy and Charlie's dogs. And one of the reasons that I think so, and it's not, you know, it's because there's a consistency of philosophy. These dogs were raised one way, and they've been trained one way, and it just expanded right on into my dog team, and, you know, and the atmosphere was very similar. So that's been extremely successful for me to get dogs from their kennel. However, other kennels that handle dogs in different manners could have bought an excellent dog. But because the philosophy and how to handle the dog was different, the consistency wasn't there, and either A, the dog never did really work out for me, or B, it took 2 or 3 years before I ever saw the potential that that dog had, you know, to come to the forefront in my kennel. And so as a young driver, or somebody that may be in the mode of purchasing that key dog, that dog that's going to change, you know, the whole atmosphere of their kennel, I would say this whole consistency thing is part of the key. You know, either A, find a driver who has the same philosophy as you have, or B, think about changing your philosophy. You know, perhaps you don't really have a philosophy, and you go to a successful driver, and I see Rick sitting here, and, you know, there's a lot of other successful drivers, and all programs aren't the same, and find out what they do, and then how they train that dog, and then take that consistency back to your kennel and put your program together, especially if that's going to be a, you know, a $5,000 key dog. Let's set the dog up to succeed, you know. I mean, that's what the dollars are for. So Roxy and I have talked about it quite a bit in the past, because I've been so pleased and successful in that area.
She's been my best customer.
Well, I'm a happy customer.
We like you.
But it's,
This is the key to it.
yeah, and you can tell a huge amount about how a dog is trained the first time you run it. I'm a sprint musher. Rick's Swenton's sitting down here about as far away from what I do as any of you could imagine. I borrowed dogs from Rick a couple of years ago. On the surface, that sounds absolutely absurd. It worked absolutely beautifully, and what became clear to me the first day I ran those dogs is Rick and I had a lot of the same rules. It didn't matter ultimately what we did with them. The dogs were professionals. They had been trained as professionals. When they came into my yard, it was comfortable. I had to teach them to go a little faster, a little different way, but the basics were the same. And that's, I think, when you see all of these partnerships forming with Roxy and Deedee or people around, we're all looking for that consistency. Maybe I'll let you choose who's going to answer this one. Do both of you discipline your dogs? And if you both do the discipline, does one discipline simply for manners, chewing lines, biting snow, stuff like that? Or do you both discipline for, all aspects, including race behavior?
I can tell you that in our kennel, basically I do all of the discipline. And Michael exercise, and then he'll come back, and he can't let really bad behavior, for instance, fighting. That can't be allowed. But any kind of a work performance problem, he usually tells me that night, this is a problem, I think you should drive so-and-so. And then I set them up the next day to see what it is he saw. And, every once in a while you'll find a dog that doesn't do that for me.
Right.
Really does it for him, And that's a little bit of a different situation. However, it doesn't really matter because he's not racing them, But he does not do it because I just have a real philosophy that he doesn't need to do it. I would hope that I'm the one that they have to ultimately respond for. So I think my situation's different than Roxy and Charlie and then Susan and Vernon's because they're all racing. They and their partners are all racing them.
How do you do it, Vern?
I think on the manners things, the chewing, the negative things, the no command's the most important one. Everybody in our kennel, we're going to use that, Beth, myself, and Susan, on all the range of dogs, all ages. Now, like the cues and things, your specific race things that you want to develop, maybe Susan's going to develop something with her team. I'm going to stay out of that, and I think in the Iditarod too, is going to have a little bit different speeds, a little bit different type of trainings. I know Wyoming's going to have 70-mile runs in mountains. She might be going faster, and so I think we're going to leave that concept up to her to develop that in her team, and we'll do the same in the Iditarod. But manners and things, I think we're kind of a stickler in that. We want dogs to be pleasant, easy going. We'll all be working on that.
I think that's just common dog courtesy that any dog owner has to have in their dogs. You can't have dogs that are going to fight with each other, and just standard things. To me, that's one kind of discipline. And then there's the other discipline, which is the team response. When you ask them to go faster or pull harder, that kind of response. And we do that together, to answer your question. And we usually do it on almost a crash course, you might say, for a period of no longer than 3 weeks max. We do our discipline training in early December, generally with a big team and 2 sleds, so we're both participating and seeing who's responding and how. And for any of the dogs that really aren't responding well to the kind of training that they need to have to win, we just don't keep them.
In that 2 or 3 week period when we're training on the hills to make sure they're responding, we may only get after a dog, any of the dogs in the team, maybe only twice during that 2 or 3 weeks. It's just, just even 1 or 2 dogs get stops during this 2 or 3 week period. Our older dogs understand that they're supposed to be working hard, pulling up these hills, and so usually only getting after 1 or 2 dogs
Fixes
teaches everybody learns it. They don't have to be physically disciplined. They just know that, okay, they learn to respond that, yes, we are going to work when we're told.
And I think that's the whole thing I was saying too. It's almost much more of a mental game. And that's why, in my case, I'm the one that puts the pressure on them, because it's more mental. But, another thing Charlie's saying that, is important for everybody to realize is good manners on the trail. Who wants to approach a dog team who's going to bite your leaders? I had somebody call me the other day and said, I'm going to be on your trails now. I'm so excited, and what's trail etiquette? And I said, your dogs don't bite mine and mine won't bite yours.
That's the same thing we tell people in our neighborhood. That's the bottom line. You can't have a dog that's going to bite another person's dog.
I don't care who's driving them. There's no excuse for that kind of behavior.
Do you ever, and under what circumstances, let your handlers discipline your dogs? Anybody? Vern?
Yes, I think Beth with us, she has full range of, especially the manners, disciplinary type things. She drives. Her sole job this year really is to help me with the Iditarod team. two teams
Mhm.
training. She's going to have a lot of the same duties I do, and so she's got 2 years experience with Rick Swenson, a year with Susan Butcher, and then this is her second full year with our kennel. I think she knows the dogs equally as well as Susan and I, so we're kind of blessed in that aspect. Now, if you had somebody of a lesser standard than that, I think I'd worry a little bit. So,
Roxy, I got a question for you. Children are not always consistent. Do you let you let children use or train your main dogs? And put it in a little wider context that not everyone here is trying to win the rendezvous.
Okay, I've been very focused on myself and Charlie about putting a main team together for years, and I've raised children in the process, and I don't let my kids just go out and drive my dogs, but they've got to drive them. I would let my children drive my dogs before I would let a handler drive my dogs.
That's what they make puppies for.
And
Right.
children are the best trainers for puppies. I don't care if the kids get tangled, lose them, or whatever. I've had the kids and their friends go out of my driveway before with 2 puppies on a flexible flyer. And these little puppies are going huckle-de-buck, and they may crash in the ditch. They may do this, but they're having fun. They're learning how to run. And I think the kids are the best puppy trainers in the whole world. And anything you can do to get those kids out there running your puppies is a blessing for the kids and a blessing for those puppies.
And I would actually say to the person who asked that, I actually think that inconsistency of kids is valuable training for your dogs. Dogs that are never around children get used to very staid, predictable adult behavior. And then when weird, new, different things happen, or you go to a race site and there are these little monsters there, they come unglued. My handler inherited a family of 4 children. It is amazing the difference in my dog team now that toddlers terrorize them. And they start, like Roxy said, when they're little teeny. The way mom babysits Saul is she locks him in the puppy pen. And she cleans the dog yard and he's in there with the puppies. And you think, oh, well, this is fun, but it's not teaching. It is teaching. It's teaching them an incredible amount. Dogs have favorites. Some dogs like one person better than the other. Charlie and Roxy, how do you deal with that?
I think all dogs like Roxy better than they do me.
No, I'm not saying
So
that
how do you rate?
facetiously.
So how do you rate?
That's true.
You guys the truth there?
This is the case. It seems like in the fact that, as Deedee mentioned, that Roxy and I train one team to win with 2 people. In any given season, the dogs will tend to focus on the person that's racing the main team. In some years, she'll walk through the kennel and all the eyes will be on her. In some years, all the eyes will be on me because I've been the one that's had the dogs under the gun that year. She seems to have abilities to do some things that I can't do as well, and vice versa. The dogs generally like Roxy better. I'm not saying that to be comical about this, but she's the good puppy trainer, and I think they do. They like you better.
I think one of the reasons we've been successful is that one of the things Deedee mentioned, that her and Mike's mutual respect and their mutual goals. Well, Charlie and I have mutual respect for each other, mutual goals, and we have different strengths and weaknesses, even though we're both good dog mushers and racers, but we have used being able to communicate with one another to complement our strengths and our weaknesses, and it has made our team stronger in the past, in that when we're talking about different dogs or different things, sometimes Charlie will see something that I didn't, and vice versa, and being able to share it, it's been made us have a better team.
We share part of the work with it too. Like Roxy generally waters the dogs, and I generally feed the dogs. And I feel strongly that only one person should feed the dogs too in a given kennel.
That was going to be my next question. Now, Vern, how do you and Susan do that? Do you both feed and water and treat?
She's pretty much predominantly doing the Wyoming dogs, her type of team. Beth is helping out with doing all the yearlings and 2-year-olds or under a certain age group. She's handling all those primarily. I'm primarily trying to do the Ditterats too, so it's kind of you're trying to work more with your own dogs yourself. If we're gone, of course, Beth, I think, is fully up to speed, almost equal to I am on my particular dogs, and I think with Susan's too. So we try to get it down to that individuality. And
You guys almost have two separate entities in your teams, don't you?
yes, right now that's. And the way we developed is Susan went to vet school from a period of 1986 through 1992, and she's developing a business, the country vet business too, and that takes a lot of time too. But it's important to us as partners, to our sponsors, to have her racing. And what she did is she ran the junior varsity, as I said, in the Iditarod for 2 years. And now we want to go beyond that and have her race a competitive team and develop that up. I think it's good for the kennel. It's good for her and our business and our sponsorship. And that's what we're trying to do is go to the next step. And it just takes time. Nothing comes quick in this sport, it doesn't seem like. So it's taken quite a few years to do that. And now we're at that level where we have enough dogs, enough time, and enough labor to take on that Wyoming race and the Iditarod too. So it's kind of fun for us.
Yeah. Now, Charlie, you said only one person should feed. Are you saying the same person should feed that is racing, or simply that the same person should feed to ensure consistency in feeding?
I think the same person should feed to ensure consistency. You know that so-and-so needs a different amount than so-and-so, and it just maintains the dog's weights more accurately.
I was going to say, in our household, I ride the runners on race day, but Lloyd feeds, and it's because Lloyd pays attention to detail, and he's got more patience with all those little fine differences and other things I have more patience with. But
we never have handlers or anybody else feed the dogs. I mean, their weight, at least particularly for the sprint racing, is real critical. We can't have any fatsos or any skinny dogs.
Right.
There's not a lot of room for variety there. That has to be real consistent.
One thing that we've done is even if I was racing, Charlie would feed the dogs, and it was just a way to feel more a part of that team, because it is such a phenomenal amount of work and effort, and it just keeps us closer as a family if we're sharing the joy and excitement. And part of feeding a dog is it really likes to eat. So, I mean, it makes the dog happy, and it helps us to both be involved with the dog team.
I don't think it'd be possible to be successful at this on any level if the family wasn't entirely involved. There's too much, it's such an energy-consuming, money-consuming endeavor that we have with sled dogs that I think you'd be starting off already with a problem if only you were a part of your family that wanted to deal with this. It's pretty hard to tolerate.
yeah.
On that same note, I think if you are having like major personality conflict with your handler or your partner or your next door neighbor who's sharing your dog team or something, I think that's a bad combination, and if you personally don't get along with that person, you should split this kennel. I mean, you shouldn't share these responsibilities, because the dogs really pick up on that,
right away.
It just isn't a good thing for them, and you kind of put them almost, I feel like children, in the middle of this conflict, and you
Fight
find
over
them
'em.
going, yeah, my dog loves me, that leader loves me more than you, and you don't know how to handle that leader. I mean, you could just see this thing just balloon into a mess, and so I really believe that it's that respect and that easy emotional atmosphere that the dogs need for that to be your partner in the kennel.
You had mentioned earlier, Kathy, something about how do you guys deal with arguments about the dogs, and I've been sitting here thinking about that. Now, Lord knows, Roxy and I have argued about lots of different things, but I honestly don't think we've ever had an argument about the dogs. We may have had a decision that required a lot of discussion and thought, but it's never really been an argument. You have to be
We
able to
argue
function
about money,
together.
but we don't argue about
Oh, God, yeah.
Right.
Boats and houses and everything else, but not dogs.
And one thing that Lloyd and I have agreed on is, if one of us, in talking about liking a handler or liking someone that's working with you, we have also made the decision in our kennel that if one of us has an overriding personality problem with an individual dog, that dog leaves the kennel, even if the other person really likes it, because it creates enough discomfort and disharmony between the two of us that one of us is always frustrated with that dog, or frustrated that the other person keeps trying to make us run that dog, or whatever. And we just agreed to disagree on that, and the dog leaves, it finds someone else to live with, and we're both much happier.
I've had some dogs that I personally just didn't like. I don't know what it was, personality traits.
I agree.
But they've been some very good performers when it came down to the race situation. Maybe in training, day after day, I just get so frustrated and mad at them to the point of almost hating them. But they'd be great performers in the race situation. So I'm a little hesitant to have a dog leave the lot just because I don't like it for some little
Well,
personality.
and it is funny how a dog that you think you don't like, the better it performs, the better you like it.
Well, at Nome, you say nice things about them, then you're mad in the fall again.
But I mean, and that's kind of a trite thing on the surface, but actually, I'll get a dog that, and I'm sure it's just because you try. It's like you meet people and you think, I don't like that person, and your best friend says, well, that's a really nice person if you'd only try to get to know them, and there's some of that with the dog, too. Let's shift gears a little bit here. How do you introduce a new person to your kennel? A lot of people now are having handlers or get married, get a girlfriend, get a next-door neighbor that wants to help with their dogs. What do you do to bring that person into your kennel? Roxy and Charlie, you've had handlers the last few years, and friends.
We've always had a relatively small kennel for open sprint team. Usually we have 50 dogs about max in our yard. And Charlie and I are both really believe in keeping only the dogs that are going to benefit or be a part of our team. And then we always have 7 or 8 older dogs that we keep, and then we have the puppies we raise. But any handlers, the only thing they do is they help hook up the main team, and they run puppies. And I don't even let my handlers run my yearlings, because for me, the yearlings are a very critical learning, and unless the yearlings are taught that year the way I want them to be, they won't be ready to be in our team when they're 2 years old. And for us, we've always maintained that either the dog is on our main team at 2 years old, or usually we sell it, because it isn't the quality that we feel we need to attain our goals. And so for us, handlers they've got to do puppies mostly. And we try to give them all the input and teach them about the main dogs, but it's one of the disadvantages if anybody's working in our kennel and they want to race, because they're not going to get a lot of racing.
We've gotten some helpers too in the past that, for one reason or another, just didn't click with the dogs. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the right personality or something. Those people generally probably feel that after a brief period of time around the dogs, they realize they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had a gal a couple of years ago that for some reason it didn't work out well with. And it seems like every time the handlers become real good and real capable and real knowledgeable, they grow out of it and leave.
Mm-hmm. And I think you might see a little bit of difference between the long distance kennels and the sprint kennels in that aspect. I think you see the long distance kennels, a lot of times I specifically have, like Beth, work with our young dogs because I don't have enough time. We specifically usually try to, and many teams have done that, Martin Boozer, Jeff King, the strategy is to have a second team in Iditarod, driven by, last year was my partner Susan. Many other times it'll be a handler or somebody associated with the kennel will specifically take those young dogs, 2-year-olds, all the way to Nome. So you'll see a little bit of difference. I think that's is a separation in long distance and sprint in that aspect.
Now, when Beth came to your kennel this fall, did you do anything special when she first came to introduce her to the dogs or get the dogs comfortable with her?
Well, that was a year ago. She basically did that herself. It was amazing to watch her. I noticed during the day she'd go around with especially young dogs and just spend a lot of time right in their circle with them, and got a list of names right away of all the dogs, exactly where they were. Used that list, and within a matter of days, I think she knew every dog's name, of all age groups. It was really an amazing process. So I congratulate her more on that. I think that would be to introduce a handler. Like this year, we have a young fella coming from New Zealand December 1st. I think we'll have basically Beth introduce him. He'll be, under her as far as responsibility, working with the pups. He'll do the simple things, cleaning up and things like that, and start out that way. And
do you make a little kennel map?
Yeah.
We've done that several times, and draw it all over paper, and here you go, it's this little spot over
how to
here.
get to the outhouse.
Yeah.
Do you have outside help,
This is where
Deedee?
you dump the fecal
Yeah, I
matter.
do it. And in one case, it's similar to Beth in that Trisha's on her 3rd season with us. And she's certainly gained my confidence. In the last 2 years, she's produced 6 of my young leaders from the yearling teams. And so I've got a lot of confidence in what Trisha's done. And she came from a sled dog family from years ago. But I have then the last person is somebody new each year. And I have a real nice girl from Norway there this year. And we did the same thing. Benta pretty much introduced herself to the dog. She spent a lot of time. The whole reason she was there was because she loves dogs. You know, so the motivation was right. And she had no intention of wanting to race or anything like that, but she did want to experience Alaska and be with dogs. I've had situations where, you know, the person was there and the personality, I mean, I asked a person to leave the kennel 2 weeks before the race one year when I said, I don't think you like what you're doing. And they said, well, I am kind of burnt out, man, you know, and I'm going, well, you know what? Not only can I tell, but my dogs can tell, and I hate the way you handle my dogs. So you can pack your bags and go. But he handled them like they were assembly line, you know, and of course all I let him do was hook up. But, you know, we had tried to bring him along into racing and stuff too, because that was a motivation he wanted. But he didn't handle the dogs so that it gave me any confidence that he had any idea what was going on with them. And in that situation, he was just the wrong. You know, Kathy, another thing in that same regard that I really pick up on is if they always come in with a lot of negatives about my dogs, I'm not too keen on this person. Because, you know, if you're always looking for the negatives, you're going to find them. There's not a perfect dog team. But I like to see somebody that's seeing a young dog developing and seeing some successes and coming back excited about some of the positives that have happened. But if they always come in and go, well, you know, they didn't just snap here and snap there and do this and do that, and, you know, I don't know. It's, to me, there's a kind of a philosophy of looking at the negatives, and I don't like to be around that myself, and I just can't help but think that the dogs feel this, you know, negative vibe thing, and it doesn't work for me. I find myself avoiding that person. You know, when they come in from a run, I don't really even want to know.
Don't want to hear.
I don't want to hear it, you know, and then I find myself defending my dogs, going, well, you know, he is 10. You know, I mean, I find myself making excuses for my dog, and kind of like, well, you know, I mean, and so it just isn't very constructive in that regard.
Let's kind of do the flip side of that. That was, you know, what do you do with a new person, but what do you do to introduce a new dog into the kennel? Now, some people buy dogs and some people don't, and I know until 3 or 4 years ago I had never bought a dog, and I had no clue how to take someone else's dogs, and I'm convinced there's a real art to it. Who of you have experience?
I buy dogs.
I know you buy dogs. I know you do, and I don't know about Vern. What do you do when you bring that new dog in to make it comfortable to bring it online as quick as possible?
Well, you know, of course, if I buy a dog, it's because, you know, I have some major idea in my mind what I plan, this career move this dog is going to bring in, because I don't buy as many as I used to. And so this is a very, very special dog that I intend to have a bond with me. And at that's the philosophy with which that dog's coming into the kennel. So that dog is usually put right up front, right close to the door, right where that dog's in eye contact with me a lot. And I make sure that the neighbors are all congenial neighbors, no chain fighting kind of neighbors. And I set this dog up to have a real comfort zone and a lot of nurturing from myself, you know, personal nurturing from myself. And so that means a dog up front, the dog that I'm giving snacks to a lot, a dog that I'm spending time in the circle with a lot, and then that they have very congenial neighbors who I also have real good relationships with, so they see that in a reaction. Then I don't put them in lead right away. You know, generally speaking, you've bought a dog because you feel like it has leader potential, but that's not where I put it. I put it in a smaller team, set the dog up to be comfortable and to understand what's happening, and you know, so I make a lot of opportunity for the dog to succeed and be comfortable. And I think that's really important because I believe that they are somewhat traumatized, you know, when they change locations, because that consistency has been, even if it's only minutely, it's still been altered. And it's usually several months in this kind of a situation before, you know, I begin to ask something more of that dog than what they're just naturally giving me. And I've been very successful with that. You know, in some cases, I've actually picked up dogs that I didn't have an opportunity to spend that much time with before I took them into a racing situation. And Elroy was a good example of that I got from Roxy and Charlie. And I asked a lot of questions so that I understood him to the best of my abilities from them, from where he was coming from them. And then I had to put him in a racing situation almost 4 weeks after I bought him in a lead, Alpirod race situation. And he did phenomenally, and he has continued to do so. And, this is a dog that's got 51 stages of Alpirod and lead and 4 Iditarods. I mean, because I feel like the consistency was there, and then he was brought into the kennel in an appropriate manner, and he had good background, the dog has been a phenomenal performer. If I had just brought him in, slammed him up front, not asked any questions, had no idea what his idiosyncrasies were, we might not have been so successful with the transfer.
Yeah, a lot of dogs lend to changing hands differently than
So you two
others.
bring dogs into your team occasionally, that aren't your dogs to race or that are new dogs. How do you deal with it?
I try not to push the dog, and like Deedee says, make the dog comfortable, but I don't expect that dog to think I'm its person in one day. But I work at spending a lot of quality time with the dog, and without pushing it, so it doesn't feel like pressure to have to be my dog. And usually I can get dogs liking me within 2 days. They think, oh wow, she's my mom too.
Charlie, do you have any
Dogs like
special
her.
tricks?
Well, you got to judge the dog a lot too by talking to the people whom you've gotten it from. Some dogs just lend quite conveniently to changing drivers. They have that put me in coach kind of attitude. That's fine. It doesn't matter who they're with in many cases, as long as they're getting to run. And some of our really, really fine dogs that we've had, like Pluto, for example, I don't think he'd run for anyone else. He's just a real personality-dependent animal. He needs his mom, he needs his dad, he needs his people, and he's really, really dependent on his interaction with us. But those are special dogs too.
I think
There's a real
Roxy,
variance in personalities.
I think the Roxy walking around with long nose
Yeah,
in her arms
you
before
got to do
the
that.
race.
Long Nose is a fluky dog. If you don't hold him on your lap before the race, you're not going to win. You just have to do this. And if it's a lead dog that's going to win a race, if you got to hold him on your lap, you got to hold him on your lap.
I think
Seems silly, but
I think that's really important. I mean, certainly having a well-conditioned and well-trained dog team is important.
Didn't you tell me about carrying Elroy around the cab of the truck all through Europe?
Oh, yeah.
He
Yeah.
would ride in the front seat.
Yeah.
And Roxy told me, I kind of like to cuddle my dogs, but Elroy doesn't like to be cuddled. He likes his hips rubbed, but he's not keen about having his face smothered. But she told me that. So, I didn't make him uncomfortable by smothering him on his face all the time. And to this day, he doesn't like that.
My leader sleeps on the bed at the Bonanza Lodge. And, when she's in a race, she wants to come in the motel room and be in the bed. And the owner of the motel knows it, and one of the reasons we stay there is because it's okay with her if the dog's in there. But, I think a lot of people humor their dogs.
Well, and on that same regard, Kathy, in spring, when, I know Vernon does a lot of these trips, that we are speaking trips and stuff. And I use that as an opportunity that's totally away from the race season, but an opportunity to bond with key dogs and take them on that trip. And they're the ones that are in the hotel. You have a tendency to take your retired dogs. But I kind of changed that philosophy a couple of years ago, and I take some key leader dog. And this year, in the spring, I took Trumpet. And she went all through Seattle, and she did the whole thing. Well, Trumpet was doing well for me and finished her first Iditarod last year. But she's doing phenomenally for me in training this year and is a main leader in this kennel. Did that help? I think so. I guess it didn't hurt, but I think maybe it helped. And it was an opportunity for a lot of one-on-one.
If you bring a new dog into a kennel and there's more than one driver, do you both drive it right off the start, or do you sort of have one person work with it for a while and then introduce the other person? How do you go at that, Vern?
Well, the most recent dogs I bought some from Rick Swenson this spring. I drove them, I think, the first day I got home, because I wanted to see they were leaders. I'd say impact type purchases. But generally before that, the last few years, I've been buying young dogs, fairly young yearlings, some up to 18 months, 2 years old. And we were just putting them with their age group, letting them get socialized. Basically, they'd go into, whatever our training program was that age group, they'd pretty much go right into that. I agree with that, not much pressure. Just kind of let them get used to their environment, the new feeding program, the new daily regimen, everything that you do, let them have total comfort of that. It seems to me the more effective dogs I've had, both purchases and leases, is the more time you have them with yourselves and in particular teams, the more effective they are. And that's why we like to get these young dogs, get them in there, you kind of figure out when they're going to be in the team, maybe a year and a half away. And then of course, like this group I brought from Rick, they're more the impact players. They're trained, I think, the best in the world, and they're going to go right into the main group. And it amazes me, like you could turn Rick's dogs loose. That's what we like to do. I like to turn them right loose, and they come to the team, they go find their own houses. If we're loading and unloading, they can jump in and out of their truck at the same time by themselves. A lot of times we come back in the kennel, turn 20 loose, just open the doors, everybody gets out. And his to do the same thing. And I like that. I mean, I like that little bit of personality. We do travel a lot in the spring in that school tour. We take all kinds of dogs. You can take sometimes a major leader. A lot of times I like to take pups because the kids and the school students like pups, I think, better than anything. But you can always see a major benefit. You can actually kind of see them grow during that when you do those personal things. They really learn a lot.
We had our best lead dog on a 150 passenger tour boat all summer long this year in Valdez.
That you can actually see them
The
grow.
dog runs better now.
And they're better for it.
People were wondering, well, is Mustang going to be spoiled? Is she going to want to sit on the couch? And I said,
I wonder.
said,
Good spoiled.
no, the more things you introduce a dog to and the more exposure they have, the more confident they become in thinking, I can go anywhere, I'm invincible, I'm really, the more...
More fun.
It's true. In Mustang's example, this is a dog that's won the Over North American as a leader. She's raced the Alparad as a leader. But I'll tell you, the stairway on the tour boat was pretty scary stuff. I spent 2 weeks carrying this dog up and down on the Glacier Queen. But after a couple of weeks, she got the stairs figured out, and found her favorite couch, and people liked it. It went quite well.
But in reality, a sled dog's world can be quite narrow, and we don't think about that until you take them to a school or to Valdez or someplace like this, and all these personal things expand their horizons. I'm a biologist. I used to take my lead dog out in the field with me as our camp dog, and she learned to find seals under the ice. And it was the same thing. People said, yeah, but you're going to ruin that dog as a sled dog. She's a bed dog. It made her a way better leader because she was so bonded and so confident.
I have to say one thing. When I bring a new dog in, I am the only one to drive it. And that's for usually quite a while. And the same deal is because, this has been a major investment for me, and I have plans, and I'm the only one. I don't want something to happen to this dog, scary situation or something. I want to be in control of those things. So Mike doesn't drive that dog when it first comes in. I save that dog and just my teams until it's been there a while.
I think that a dog feels a lot more trauma at moving to a different yard than people realize, too. I would say that it takes, the dogs may accept you and they may do good for you, but it takes them a year to think that, yeah, this is my place. I don't think that they, even if they are doing well, that they really feel like, okay, this is my real home. They feel misplaced, and I think that just one person driving them for at least a few weeks is good because they're already traumatized by just moving homes, and to put more trauma on them by, okay, now we're going to give you 2 or 3 different people, that's even more trauma.
Do you notice the difference between dogs that are moved for the first time and dogs that are on sequential moves?
That brings to mind this dog Atla Jack that Bill Cotter has, and of course he was George's dog, and I have no idea who all drove, if just George drove him or what. But then he went Bill's dog, and then Bill and Littler have driven him, and then I drove him in the comeback last year. That dog did not listen to me. We had some major differences of opinions, and it didn't help any that he was on his home trails, that was that was a good example of, was I a good dog driver? Well, he didn't seem to think so. You know, I mean, we had some
You should
amazing-
listen. You should listen to it.
Sure. The kennel's over here. I know the shortcut.
He knew what was going on.
Oh, baby, and you know, if I had had that dog all winter, I think, you know, we could have come to some agreements. But he's a great dog, and he was plenty smart to realize that it was time to pull the stops out and see what all he could get away with. And that's not a good situation when you're racing. You know, and I'd only driven him for a week prior to that. So to me, that was a good example of a bad transfer. And he's a great dog, and I would be glad to race him again, but I'd want to have him for several months before I went into that situation. That dog was set up to either make me fail or he was going to fail. You know, so it's just a real good example of something that you shouldn't do, in my opinion. I mean, Bill and I did it anyways, but we shouldn't have.
You know, just as an example, Roxy just mentioned this to me. I won the North America one year with a team that my father-in-law, Gareth Wright, and I were sitting around at the banquet after the race and having a bottle of wine or two or three or whatever. We're talking about this team. And I commented to Gareth, you know, I think this is the finest team I've ever driven in my life. And he was talking all over. I said, well, why don't you race them next weekend in Toke? And he did. It was kind of a nice thing to do in the family. We got together on Wednesday, and we drove the entire team together with 2 sleds, and that was it, cold turkey. And you know, Gareth, when he goes places, he likes to have a beer and be sociable and carry on a bit. But boy, he got real serious in Toke. It's kind of funny watching him, asking all kinds of questions. I'd be darned if he didn't win the race. Just barely, but he won. And it was sort of just an unusual interaction, but it was kind of fun.
But the confidence of the dogs, we've talked about that. Well, there's also the confidence of the musher.
Yes.
That's very important. And one of the things my dad said that after Saturday night at Toke, and he was behind, and I told him, you can win this race. I mean, this dog team, and you can win this race. And he says, he knew I meant it, and so he believed me because I was so sincere and telling him, don't worry that you're a minute or 2 behind. You can do this, Dad, and he did, and he had the confidence, and part of his confidence came from my interaction with him. And when 2 people are training the dog team, it's real important that you're not only keeping confidence in the dogs with consistency, but sometimes the supporting helper is giving confidence to the driver. Many times Charlie has helped me to get through bouts of lack of confidence. I lost Pluto Friday of the rendezvous one year, and I mean, I thought I was going to die. I couldn't go down the street without Pluto. And he just told me on the way to the race, he says, you know, you've gone out of the dog yard with millions of times without any leaders, and you always get around the trail, and you've got 2 leaders that you're putting in front of this team today. Yes, maybe they're not Pluto, and that's what I needed to hear, and he gave me the confidence that I needed at that point.
People underestimate confidence a lot. I mean, I always tell people there's 2 reasons a winning dog team is hard to beat. One is because it's a very good dog team, but the second reason is because of the incredible confidence of not only the drivers, but the dogs. All those dogs get in that winning team. I mean, I think it's as high as a drug high. Mom is happy, Dad is happy, the whole world loves them and thinks they're wonderful, and their world it's just this huge, big, wonderful thing. Everybody's happy, everybody's positive. I mean, there's tension in too, but it's a real significant factor, and if you can think about that yourself, and I mean, even when you're not winning, try to provide some of that confidence and reassurance to your dogs, I think you end up with a lot better performing dog team. If any of you have questions, wander them down this way. If you're buying a new dog for your kennel, are you better off to buy it in the spring or the fall?
Spring.
Why?
Spend more time with them before you ever start to put the pressure of running on them. That's my opinion.
I agree with that. The more time you have the dog, the better off you're going to be as far as the race situation, where there is quite a bit more pressure. We're talking about the confidence of the musher and the dog team, and I think the dog's just going to be more confident in the musher, and vice versa, the more time you have to spend with them. And so the best dogs for us always seem to be the ones we raised and well bred at our place. Then you have dogs that you do purchase out of need or something like that. You have to spend time with them. So.
Now, do you notice the difference in how fast the dog adjusts, whether it's just coming in the kennel and getting tied up and not doing much, or whether it's coming into the kennel and being harnessed and working? I guess the reason I asked that, I got a dog last June. That dog basically never forgave me for being his new owner from June until the 1st of September. I pulled out a harness on the 1st of September, and I'm his long-lost best buddy, and he jumps in my lap and comes when he's called, and it's like somebody turned a button overnight.
I think that perhaps sometimes it depends on the individual dog too. The case that you just mentioned, Charlie and I have just sold all of our main dogs, and my son Ray and my sister Shannon and Curtis got the majority of them. And there were a few of our dogs that tend to be a little high-strung, shy except for when they're around Charlie and I, because we were their life. And there was one of my 3-year-olds that she would not come out of her house all summer long for Shannon. She just...
Well, this is an in-your-lap dog.
Yeah.
She was very traumatized that she had a new home, but as soon as Shannon started running, she could turn her loose. She's running around, wagging her tail, and she's happy because she loves to run. But I guess moving to a new home and then not getting to do something that was so happy and familiar that she loves to do, running was probably for that particular dog was more of a trauma going there in the spring than it would have been going in the fall.
It does vary.
It's worth thinking about what the dogs come from, I think, when you bring a dog into your kennel. I had a dog come to my yard from Belgium this summer, and it was introduced to me as the happiest, most outgoing, lovable dog this musher had ever owned. And she came to my yard and the letter that came with her was misplaced, so I had no introduction. And I have a 30-dog kennel, which is sort of a medium-sized kennel. It's a huge kennel, it turns out, by European standards, and sort of a medium one by Alaska standards, and pretty typical Alaska dog yard. The dogs live on chains, they eat on top of their houses, and half of them live on dirt and a few of them live on plywood. This dog came into my yard and she didn't move for 3 weeks. She could barely eat. She wasn't friendly. She was terrified of the world. And I'm sitting here going, this is the friendliest dog someone has ever seen. Finally, I connected with the letter of introduction. Not too surprisingly, Brenda had been raised in a kennel of 8 dogs, in a chain link enclosure. She had never had a chain on in her entire life. And she'd always lived on a hard surface. And she was totally devastated. And I sat there one day, 3.5 weeks later, the dog still couldn't manage to get on its house. And I looked at Lloyd and I said, what? I said, move her over there on the plywood. And he looked at me like, move her on the plywood? I said, just move her on the plywood. It was muddy. Moved her on the plywood. Oh, I'm a dog again. The floor's not sticky and wet and yucky. No problem. And then adjustment happened just fine, and now she can get her feet muddy and she doesn't come unglued. But some of those little tiny things make a very big difference. When you purchase a dog from another kennel, is it permissible to change its name? Or is it desirable to change its name?
I wouldn't do it. I don't do that.
Whenever I've gotten a dog that's called Roxy, I change its name.
Why, Roxy?
Every dog kennel in the world is a dog named Roxy, I think.
And I've seen some real ugly dogs that people sent me pictures of named Deedee.
I've had some people tell me they will intentionally change a dog's name.
I don't know any reason for that. I think it'd be a negative.
I do too. But sometimes you would have to, just out of sheer necessity for the reasons we just talked about. But
Sometimes it'll take me 1.5 years to actually come up with a final name on some of our dogs, just because I'll name them and this name does not fit this dog. So I'll use that name for a couple months before, okay, I'll try this name. And I have had dogs that actually didn't get their name till they were almost 2 years old.
Maybe we're kind of slow. Did you think about that?
Yeah.
My daughter was a week old before I named her.
But my dogs, I always talk to them by name in the kennel, and they usually have 3 or 4 nicknames, so I don't think it's a big deal for my dogs to be called by more than one name.
I have 2 or 3 names for lots of my dogs, and in fact, I have a leader named Bolero, and Tim White told me he looks like Buck from Sergeant Preston and Buck of the Yukon, and so Buck stuck, and only Buck's his nickname, and Lloyd and I call him Buck if we're happy, and we didn't really think much about it, but we never call him Buck if we're not happy. And it's amazing. When I get upset and he's being disciplined, if I give him a command and use his nickname, he doesn't respond. If I say, Bolero, come, he's at my feet in an instant. And it's just sort of, it wakes you right up, realizing dogs perceive a lot of little subtle differences. Let's see here. Leader training. Do you both do the leader training? Does one person do the leader training? And do you ever let anybody but yourself do the leader training? Anybody?
Trish is a really good leader trainer, and she does a lot of the manners. And as far as confidence building and running them, I take them over as yearlings and go from there. But really, Trish and I do the leader training, and I share it with her, and she's really good. Like what she does, one of the things she does is put a ski tour belt on and jog with them in the summer and get them used to activity behind them. And so we're doing a lot of things happening with these leaders, outside of the main training season. But once we get in, like now, in the main training season, I've taken the main leaders away, and they're mine, and nobody's leader training them but me. And the young leaders, when Mike's got a team, he's got the older leaders in front, the guys that have been there for a while. For instance, until I think that year that I broke my hand, Mike never drove Elroy. Only I drove Elroy. Mm-hmm. And if he ever had Elroy in the team, he never had him in lead, And I pretty much have saved that dog just for myself. And sensitive dogs I've saved just for myself in lead, just so that they would always get the same responses, I guess.
Vern, do both you and Susan do your leader training?
Yes, and even Beth, especially in the young dogs, we're always constantly looking for leaders, leader potential, working, letting them have the opportunity to be up and lead, show if they can lead. If they don't want to do it, not using them. Of course, the Iditarod dog team, I have specific leaders in there, and I'm probably predominantly going to be running those as opposed to Susan and her Wyoming dog. She has specific leaders. She's going to be working with those in her dog team. Beth, of course, is helping with the Iditarod team and sometimes the Wyoming. She has full range of running those leaders too. I have had leaders that, like Susan will say, this dog doesn't perform for me quite as well, and I just love it. It's like it does everything I want, and vice versa. And I think that's just the individual person and the individual dog. And I don't worry about that too much. I'll tell you the truth. I just think and I think at our kennel, our dogs know Beth and Susan and myself almost equally, and we run them to that extent. And I guess we all have our favorite leaders, and I do, and I'm sure Susan does, and I'm sure Beth even does to some extent now too. So, but
we
try
have a lot of leaders.
What's that? That's it.
Roxy and Charlie, do you specialize in your leader training?
For us, is with the sprint race thing, a lot of the leader training is the interaction of 2 teams as well. So I think probably, we really do share a lot of the leader training.
But we've in training we are partners and equals, and so we don't have one leader that's Charlie's or one that's mine. They work for both of us because they are part of our whole training unit and the whole dog team. I tend to like to train young dogs and young leaders more than Charlie does, and a lot has to do with our sharing of time and work. He there's certain things that he does. He changes the oil. I don't, and but I happen to really enjoy training young dogs and leaders. So when they're young, I tend to do a little more of the training. But once they are on our team, they run probably equally for both of us. I mean, it's just something that we share.
It tends to work that way in our house. Sled drags the trail, and I really like to mess around with young leaders. It's just something I love to do, and I like messing around with problem dogs.
We've been doing more leader training in the last couple of weeks probably than we have in years because we sold all of our dogs.
And you have time.
Except for one adult leader. So now we've got these 16 yearlings we're running with one adult leader. So it's crash course
now
time.
The leader sometimes is Roxy.
Yeah. I've been a good leader a few times myself.
I'm going to go back to something here. Earlier, some of you have said that because of time constraints or other constraints, you have other people run your puppies, and then you pick them up when their yearlings or come into the main team. I guess I personally have, for a while, I had someone else running my puppies, and suddenly I got them as yearlings, and they did a lot of things that my dogs had never done before. And, I started thinking, why do I just suddenly have an intractable bunch of puppies? And I could certainly train them out of it as yearlings, but I'm back to the point now that I really like to train my own puppies because they come out of the season trained the way I want them to be trained.
Well, Kathy, I think Vern really alluded to that earlier. It's the difference between a sprint kennel and a long-distance kennel. Those of us that have to train 50 to 100 miles can't be training all of our yearlings, too. We just are spending too many hours on the trail as it is. So by necessity, we've developed a little different approach because that's the only way we could survive it, And I don't think one way's that much more. I would wish that nobody drove anything but me.
Right.
But ultimately, in a 90-dog kennel, that's just not going to happen. And especially when I'm training for long-distance racing. So, we've developed these other methods to handle it. I hear Vern say the same thing. A lot of what's happening in his kennel is mine. And, we've found handlers that over the years have developed enough confidence in them to let them take these younger dogs to another plateau. Trisha's been 3 years. Beth's been, 5 years in the business and several years in the same kennel. These are the kinds of people then that we would be willing to turn our yearlings over to and take them over as a 2-year-old. And I know in Cotter's kennel, Bill doesn't even run a dog till it's 2 years old.
Yeah.
Lillard takes it from the time its harness broke up until she turns it over to him at 2. And he and I have talked a lot about this, and it's whether we would like it ultimately that way or not, that's the only way you can put that kind of a program together and get those kinds of miles on those long distance teams.
That's exactly, she hit it right on the nose. It's like Beth, she's actually a trainer. That's her job. She's a trainer. The handler's coming December 1st.
Gotcha.
Same
Help
with
up.
Tricia.
And that's
Trisha's a trainer.
the
Important
level she is.
difference there.
And then it depends on what you're doing with the young dogs. Now, we've switched over to a system where the young puppies, the yearly, and we had puppies that were born last spring, April, through that area, they're free running. And Beth does that all the time. 4-wheelers or snow machines, 15, 20 of them go at a time. They run right with the machine out 4 or 5 miles, come back. They'll be harness broken too and run that way, and that'll be primarily Beth's and then this new handler's responsibility. The yearlings, almost exclusively, I think Beth will probably be working with them too. And just because they need that level of training. I think that's a very significant age. And
they need time, and I guess at the same time I say I want to train my own puppies. One of the most wonderful things that has happened to me in the last year is Lynn Orbison has offered to help me train some of my puppies, and Lynn has unlimited time, energy, and affection, and all of a sudden these dogs have all of this experience all the time, and they get to meet pigs and ponies and goats and who knows what else, and we have compatible approaches to our puppies and similar bottom lines.
And I think you have if you have 90 dogs or whatever size you want to have your kennel, I think you have the responsibility to have the competent labor, enough of it. If your time is taken up with your Iditarod team, you have the ability and the labor to make sure these dogs of all age groups are are enjoying their lives and learning something and doing what they're bred to be doing, and the reason you have them, and not just to be letting them set so that when they're 2-year-olds, all of a sudden I'm going to use them.
Yeah.
I think you have that responsibility.
My philosophy on puppies is I'm very I tend to be like Deedee, that I don't want nobody else running my dogs once they're a year old. But she waits, may have to have her trainer help when they're a year old just because of time. But with puppies, I like the more people that run them, the better. The main thing is I just want anybody who's around the puppies to be happy. I don't care if they know what they're doing or they don't know what they're doing. The more things that those puppies and the more people those puppies are exposed to, the more confidence and a better dog that those will be ready when they're a year old to be really start serious training. For me, I love more people and kids running my puppies. Just happy. That's the most important thing. The only thing I really discipline puppies for is they can't fight and they can't chew their toe line.
Yeah. We're out of time, guys. Any parting shots, something that we haven't covered, or something you want to take-home message you want to leave people with?
Nope.
Have a good winter.
Love them and have a good time with them.